Hello YouTube. This video is about how we address this problem. As you can see, we have a clearance problem between the yoke in the transmission and the cross member. This problem was created when we corrected the tilt of the motor to get correct driveline angles. We had to tilt the motor down in the back so it no longer clears the original notch. So what do we do about it? Well, we've decided what we're going to do is take the loop in the back here that we copied from the original in the last video. We still have the original, and we're going to take the original and put it here and cut the frame in half. What we're looking at is the rear cross member, and what we can see are holes in the cross member, and the hoop goes on and lines up with those holes. Now those holes are the size of a 3/8 inch bolt, and they're actually tubes that have been inserted in the frame and welded in place. So that's what I intend to do up in the front. I'm going to drill holes for the tubes. I'm going to make an end cap for the cross member, and we're going to reproduce the mount that my son designed in the front. This is the front cross member, and this is the original loop from the rear cross member. And if we put it in the correct position where the top hole is lined up with the top of the cross member, we find that we're going to have lots of clearance for the drive shaft, but we're going to have to do some cutting, and that's certainly in our future. What we've done is carefully clamped the loop into place, and it is centered on the drive shaft, 7/8 of an inch on this side and 7/8 of an inch on this side. So we have the loop exactly centered on the yoke. And then what I did is I took a centering punch, which has a point in this very center and is the size of the hole, and I inserted it into the hole to get the very top of the center on the top of the frame. That's how the rear loop was done, and that's how we'll do this loop. So I've got the height adjusted and I've got the width adjusted. What we can do is to mark the center of these holes. Then we'll carefully remove one of these clamps at a time and turn it around so we can mark the lower holes on the front side. Now that we have the clamps turned around, we have just enough room for the centering punch to go into the lower hole on the front, and we have just enough room to strike it with a hammer. So we'll do the other side. Now obviously what's going to happen here is as we start drilling lower and lower holes, this is going to be a problem. What we'll do now is remove the hoop. Locate the centering marks that we just put on here. And there's one right there. And we'll punch it for a pilot drill. And here it is. Okay, let's slide the hoop back on. And take a look. That one looks good. Where the heck is this one? And that one looks good. Now what we're going to do is remove the hoop and drill 1/8 inch pilot holes in our punches. These two holes are going to probably be the most important holes because they're going to locate everything. So we're going to be very careful how we drill them. The 3/8 inch bolt fits through the hole very nicely. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to drill out this hole. We'll start with an 1/8 inch drill bit. Next, we'll go to a 7/32 inch bit. My 1/4 inch bit, which is what I would go to with, is dull. So here goes the next step up. Now we'll go to 5/16. Next, we'll go to 3/8. Now we'll test fit the bolt. And now let's test fit the hoop. So the bolt goes in both holes, so we're centered properly. And it's time to drill out the holes from the front. Hopefully they line up with the holes in the back. We'll find this center punch here. And drill our 1/8 inch pilot hole. And now we'll go to 3/8. Let's check to see how well the hoop fits. That bolt goes in, and that bolt goes in. Remember how the top bolt goes through the frame. It has a sleeve that accepts the bolt, but it's embedded in the top of the frame. It's not drilled as a hole. So what we have to do is create a opening in the top of the frame to put our sleeve in, and that's what we're going to mark now. What we have here is the front loop bolted into the frame, and what we need to do is locate the sleeve in the top of this frame so that this bolt will go through the sleeve. So what I'm going to do is take the sleeve and slide it into position. And mark it. Remove the loop. Measure in 5/8 of an inch. Draw a line. And what we have to do is now cut this out so that our sleeve will be embedded in the top of the frame. What we have here are the markings that we made when we put the sleeve inside of the hoop. These markings are actually a little undersized so that if I'm in error, I can grind out the edge a little bit. We've marked the back side of the frame with how deep we want to go. We're going to start with just a score and work our way a little deeper as we go across, trying to make the groove for the sleeve. This is the front loop, and what we want to do is put the bottom half of the original loop in place, but we can't because of this hat channel. This is not a box frame, this is a hat channel frame. So we're going to have to cut this hat off in order to put this up here to get our locations for our holes. We got more holes to drill. So I told you we're going to cut, we're going to cut. So first we have to mark. And I'm going to give myself a 1/4 inch play on each side. It'll make a nice corner and it'll help strengthen that corner. Time to get out the cutoff wheel. Let's see if we can wiggle this off. There we go. Now we can lay out the lower hoop. With the bottom of the hat channel removed, I've put the top loop back in place and fully bolted it around and clamped the bottom loop in place, and we're going to go back to center punching and drilling holes, but we got to be careful how we center punch these holes. As I can only punch the 2 upper holes at once. Now I'm going to carefully move each clamp one at a time and I'll get the lower holes. You know the routine that we followed when we drilled out the holes for the upper loop. We're going to follow the same routine for the lower holes. We'll remove the clamp, center punch it for an 1/8 inch drill bit, step up to a 1/4 inch drill bit, and again go to 3/8 and we'll slide some bolts in there. At this point we have the rear hoop held in place by 3/8 inch bolts, so we know that the 3/8 hole in the frame is lined up with the bottom loop in the rear. But we have a problem in the front. This is the front loop. It presents some challenges because of the transmission mount. Normally we would be able to put a centering punch in the hole and hit it, but obviously we can't do that with the transmission mount. But we lucked out. There's a hole in the transmission mount that just about lines up with the hole in the frame, and if I put a bolt through it, I'm going to be able to mark the center of that hole. That's not all the challenges we have. We now would love to be able to drill a hole in that punch mark, but the drill won't fit. So how are we going to drill these holes? Well, what we're going to do is drill an 1/8 inch hole on that centering punch as best we can, and then we're going to drill from the other side and try to find that 1/8 inch hole and finish the hole. I've drilled all the holes out in the frame to 3/8 of an inch, and it accepts the bolts. Next step will be to enlarge the holes in the frame to 5/8 of an inch so that we can put sleeves in. We'll get started by removing the lower bolts. That's the last 5/8 inch hole that I have to drill, and boy am I glad about that. It's noisy and it's hard. Now we test the sleeve, and the sleeve fits very nicely. So the next step is to put the hoops back on with the sleeves in. What we have here is all the bolts in place, all the sleeves in place, and we can get an idea of what it's going to look like when it's done. We've got to cut the center out. Here, let me see if I can give you a little closer look at the sleeves in the frame. If you look carefully, you can see the sleeves that hold the frame apart, so when we tighten these bolts, we don't crush the frame. Well, I'm just finishing up with a wire brush. What we're looking at here is the rear loop. This is my copy of the original loop that was in the frame. And as you can see, the treatment on the end of the subframe is that there is a flat end cap and that the curve of the loop goes outside of the end cap. So when we make our end cap, we're going to do the same thing. So here we go. We've cut the center out of the subframe. We now have some holes in the ends of the subframes that we want to fill. I have some nice plate here that's the same gauge as the frame. I've carefully taken measurements of the ends of these frames, and we're going to go take those measurements, lay it out on this piece of metal, and then cut it with the bandsaw. If you look carefully, you can see the scribe mark that I've made to cut out these two pieces. So now we'll go to the bandsaw. So here we are at the bandsaw, and we'll just start cutting. And there we go, we got two pieces cut out. Here are the end caps we made, held in by magnets, and we're going to be welding those in. What I'm doing here is I'm marking each piece of each loop with a stamp so that I can sandblast and powder coat and identify where each piece went. And in this case, I'm going to mark this one BF, and that stands for bottom front. And the only side that'll be marked will be the inside. So when I put it all together, I'll know that this goes in the bottom front and this is outside. So let's stamp this. All right, and I'll show you what we got. So here's the BF stamp that we just put in the bottom front hoop. And because this side is marked, it's the inside. Okay, let's sandblast these. Here are the loops after sandblasting and before powder coat. You can still read the stampings, but they're very faint. Let's apply some powder coat. And we'll cook them at 400 degrees for 20 minutes. Here are the loops after powder coat. They're looking pretty good. Here we are tacking the tubes in. Once we get the tubes tacked in, we'll take the hoops back off and tack in the end caps. Here we are welding in the tubes and the end plates. Lots of welding to be done. So here is a nice close-up of the tubes welded in and the end caps welded in. Let's take a look at the other side. This side was particularly challenging because of the transmission mounts that are welded to the frame. We couldn't get a direct shot at the holes because of the transmission mounts, And what we did is we drilled from the back side. So these holes were particularly challenging. This spot has been empty far too long. It's time to put the engine back in place and see how we did for spacing on the transmission. This is the back side of our new loop. All the bolts are loosely in place. If we look from the side, we can see all the sleeves. They've been tumbled and powder coated, and we can take a look at the front. This is a look from the front. You can see the cross member, the loop we just mounted, and the loop in the rear, and they all kind of match. Now it's time to put the motor in. Here's a look at the loop that we just made with the motor and transmission in place. And as you can see, it fits nicely. Goes along with the theme of the rear one. If you enjoyed the video, there'll be more.